iPhone 14 Pro Max versus iPhone 8 Plus 6 years later. So the focus of this video is primarily on should you upgrade your 8 Plus finally. You know, the iPhone 15 Pro Max is around the corner. I've had this one since launch, and the 15 Pro Max is only going to improve upon this. For those of you who keep it long term, I'm going to call you the long term warriors because you are such a warrior for holding it out this long. You know, the iPhone 8 Plus has reached the end of the road in terms of updates to major software. We're not going to see iOS 17 make its way to the iPhone 8 Plus. However, we are running the latest version of 16.6 over here for Apple's iPhone 8 Plus. And I remember this phone like it was yesterday. I purchased the white one, covered it on the channel, has like over 1 million views on our initial review. And then I like this one so much that I went and picked up the product red. So if you do have the 8 Plus, shout outs to you for keeping it this long. Let me know how it's performed for you. We're going to begin by talking about the body and the builds and how much of an upgrade this has felt like. Well, it's felt substantial because we went to a more industrial design here. The dynamic island is big over the notch, but looking at the bezels these days, I mean, this phone just doesn't look up to date anymore. So if you're deciding that it's finally time to make a big upgrade, you're going to be getting rid of these bezels. Now, earlier on in the initial days of the 8 Plus, it could rotate into landscape, but in recent updates, they took that away. So you can't really even do that anymore. But this did give you an area to hold on to when you were gaming and stuff like that. But just the flat square display now just kind of looks a little bit old, if you ask me. Also, durability enhancements have been huge on recent updates with ceramic shield, the stainless steel edges over the aluminum. It's just a stronger metal. And while the 8 Plus was much easier to hold and lighter than the current iPhones, I mean, look at the camera differences. It's absolutely massive. You are in for a treat when you decide to do this upgrade this year, whether you go to a 14 Pro Max or you go to a 15 Pro Max from your 8 Plus. So definitely the bezels, the design looking quite dated at this point. And it kind of makes sense why it's reaching the end of the line. This just kind of feels like a blown up iPhone SE. You know, the SE that's out right now, the current SE. A lot of people wanted to see this phone as an SE Plus or something. But Apple looks like, it's looking like, according to rumors, that Apple's going to go to a more up-to-date design for the next SE. Really, fingers crossed. They cannot keep bringing these old designs to the SE line, or that phone's just going to fizzle out, in my opinion. From a display perspective, I think basically you can see it right here. I mean, look at the top of the iPhone 14 Pro Max. Look at the top of the iPhone 8 Plus. Look at the bottom. I mean, it's incredibly huge. You do have an LCD panel here, though. And if you want to talk about how it's held up over the years, I could tell you it still looks fantastic to this day. Still a Retina quality panel, and the display itself is still plenty sharp and I would say plenty bright. It's very usable here in 2023. It's not like it's an unusable display. It's pretty smooth, actually. The 60 hertz, once updated, once turned on, pretty smooth. I don't have major issues whatsoever with the 8 Plus's display. It just kind of feels like one of those older iPads, you know, the iPads that don't have the newer updated all-screen designs. And while it's not as fast of a refresh, it's functional. It's pretty functional, actually. But you go to the super fast refresh of the iPhone 14 Pro Max, the upcoming 15 Pro Max from your 8 Plus, and you're in for a treat, not only in a smooth refresh, much brighter, and much more screen area. However, keep in mind that the 8 Plus did have the Touch ID in the way down there, so that's what was taking up some of the space of this phone, but it made it easy to unlock and stuff like that. So if you miss Touch ID, comment down below, Touch ID fanboy. But no, I'm just kidding. Just comment down below if you enjoyed the Touch ID. The iPhone 14 Pro Max, though, this phone right here with its display has been a massive change for me. And this is one of the areas that I really enjoyed the most recent iPhone update since the 13 Pro Max is the display panels. They're just way brighter, they're way smoother, and they're just so much more enjoyable to use than years ago. However, you know, I still want to see some kind of folding device or flipping device maybe, or even something totally new from Apple, because it's still a slab style smartphone and it doesn't really feel like something majorly different. But if you do have the 8 Plus 6 years later, going to the display upgrade, it's going to be massive. I do think it's time for you to go ahead and consider doing that. Now, moving on to the software. Surprisingly enough, the software is actually not that different besides the way that you go ahead and operate it on the 8 Plus, where you'll bring the control center down from the bottom. That is definitely a different experience in the software. And then you bring the notifications over here just from the top. But the actual 16.6 is essentially the same. You got widgets, you have the same wallpapers. I mean, you could add basically anything you want on the home screen. You got the same basic experience. So I think it's pretty incredible that you have this same experience on a phone that came out in 2017. And I talked about how great the A11 Bionic was back then, and how I thought this was finally the time that these phones were still going to perform better way down the line. And here we are way down the line. And that theory I had back then came true, because when the A11 Bionic came out, it was a big deal, and it still performs good enough for functional daily use. It's not going to be a boss in the gaming. It's not going to be a boss in basically anything anymore by comparison to current modern phones. But the fact of the matter is it doesn't perform like an older iPhone would have years ago. So like when the iPhone 8 Plus came out, if we were talking about a 5-year-old iPhone at that time, which would have been like something like a 5 or a 5S, that thing was performing horrible at the time. So what this shows is that the smartphone market has matured to the point that even if you buy a phone now, in 5 years, it should still be performing very well. The 8 Plus is a good example of this. And with the CPU is getting even more powerful, I do think that, you know, these current 14 Pro, Pro Maxes, 15 Pro, Pro Maxes that are coming, Ultras, whatever they want to call them, they're going to be even better down the line. So software, still pretty good. But keep in mind, it is the end of the line for software. Just keep that in mind, that's for sure. Now, from the battery perspective, we have to talk 6 years later. iPhones have been flip-flopping. You know, my 14 Pro Max is doing pretty good. But there's been years where it's been better and not better. The iPhone 11 Pro Max, which was also an upgrade over the iPhone 8 Plus, was really good. Then we had a mid-level battery life on the iPhone 12 Pro Max, 13 Pro Max, a king once again, and now the 14 Pro Max, pretty good, but not the king. So this kind of reminds me of the 12 Pro Max with not being the king, but still pretty good. The next version, though, is going to be pretty big. And why is this important? Because when the iPhone 8 Plus came out around 6 years ago, this phone was essentially a battery beast. To this day, does it perform well? Yes. I wouldn't say it's nearly as good as when it first came out, but the battery life on this is pretty good. And the only reason it's not 100% capacity is because I got rid of my original one. And then by the time I got this one, some other phones were coming out. I was reviewing them, so it didn't get as much usage. If you're wondering, how the heck do you have 100 capacity after all these years? Well, that's because what I just told you. I had the original one, traded it off, got this one, and then other phones started coming out. We started covering those instead. But battery life on this one, definitely, you can feel that it's depleted with certain software updates, meaning that it doesn't perform as well as it used to on these more current software updates. But I can tell you right now, with regular use, you can still make it through a day easily on the 8 Plus. All right, so let's talk the next biggest update. It's been the cameras. I mean, just looking at them, we don't even have to look at the software. I mean, goodness, look at the size difference right there. And, you know, this is something Apple does really well. They kind of always do this. They make their camera lenses, even though the actual lens inside of that circle is much smaller than the lens would indicate. They keep making the outer part much bigger, so it kind of lets the customer know, look, better camera, new year, buy this iPhone. But let's go over here and take a look at this right here, and you'll see that you just have so many more options here: 2x, 3x, 0.5. I mean, the list goes on and on. There are so many massive upgrades, and that's why I'm saying you're a warrior if you stuck it out this long with the 8 Plus, because you have video, you have photo, you have 4K 60 on here as well, but you don't have it on the front. The video quality has been massively improved 17 times over already on different iPhones, but you only had 1 to 2x, and 10x was your max zoom, which is pretty solid considering the new iPhones don't even have, some of the newer iPhones don't even have more than like 5 times zoom. I'm talking to you, iPhone 14 Plus, 10 times zoom on the iPhone 8 Plus. However, if you're, using 8 Plus and you're ready to go to 15 Pro Max, it's going to be huge here because your telephoto is going to go to the max with the zoom as much as they've ever done. And then you're going to get better front facing camera, better photos, better portrait modes. I still got to tell you, the A Plus was a pretty good camera. And honestly, I know it sounds like I keep repeating myself here, but iPhone cameras have been so good for so long that I wouldn't hesitate to maybe sharpen it up, maybe edit it a little bit and throw one of these photos on Instagram to this day. That's how good the cameras have been on iPhones for such a long time. However, the front facing camera is definitely suffering. It doesn't look up to par with the current stuff. But surprisingly, there are some really crappy camera phones out there on the front that are still not as good as the 8 Plus. So my 6 years later take is it held its own. It did fine. But you ready for an upgrade because it's going to be massive here. It's been massive already. And, the 8 Plus never felt like a camera phone that could replace my camera. I'm already at that point with the iPhone 14 Pro Max. I was at that point with the 13 Pro Max. I was already thinking I was at that point with the 11 Pro Max, but not quite. But with these current ones, I only shoot on this camera because it's easier, more efficient to just leave it up here. But if I had to only use the iPhone, I could make this whole channel just on the iPhone and any other YouTube channel, TikTok, Instagram video, Facebook, whatever you want to do, however you want to create your video, your content. These phones now are ready to do it. These phones back then did okay for the time, but they were never like replace camera level to me. A couple other massive upgrades have been audio sounds so much better. Although you don't have headphone jack, you didn't have it on the 8 Plus either, and that was 6 years ago. So Apple got rid of that thing 6 years ago. In addition, the Bluetooth is faster. The overall 5G is much faster when it comes to your signal strength. And so you just have much better everything right now. 6 years later, like if you're holding it out, you're just kind of dealing with it because you probably don't want to upgrade yet, or it's just not in budget just yet for you. But at the same time, when you make this upgrade, the phone call quality, speaker calls are going to get better as well. And you'll have a little bit of a bigger area, screen area to go ahead and put your calls in. You can see the buttons are slightly bigger, screen's a little bit bigger. Not a major deal, but it's something to keep in mind. Better signal strength is huge. 8 Plus wasn't really a king right there. So wrapping it up here, 6 years later, if I'm going to give the 8 Plus its props, I'm going to give it to it because it did pretty good. This phone I don't hold this phone now and feel like this is a cheap phone. No, I hold this phone now and think like, it's a pretty nice phone. It feels premium. It just feels old. It feels like old premium. Like if you went and checked that old classic, I wouldn't say a classic car, but like maybe like a 5 or 6 year old car that was just a really nice car at the time. It doesn't look super up to date now, but it was still very nice. That's the 8 Plus. Like if you went and picked up a nice 2017, 2018 model year car. Over here, the iPhone 14 Pro Max feels like the most modern beast from Apple, with the next beast on its way in just a couple of weeks. It's been a lot of nice upgrades, and this is an upgrade it's going to feel bigger than these 1 year or 2 year or even 3 year upgrades. This is going to feel like one of the biggest upgrades for any iPhone user. So those of you who have this device, I would say go for it. This is definitely time. It's the end of the road with software. Thumbs up if you enjoyed it. Share your experience if you had the 8 Plus this long. I'd love to talk to you about that. And I'll catch you all in the next episode. Nick here. Be sure to be well, and peace.